We are no longer able to change a situation. We are challenged to change ourselves. This famous quote from Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl demonstrates how making changes within ourselves is where true transformation happens. My guest today, Dr. Chris Pineda, is the founder of Groundwork Leadership and specializes in helping leaders across sectors become catalysts for change, for themselves, for their organizations, and for the communities they serve. This is E3. Engage and empower with empathy. Welcome to today's podcast. Chris, it's so nice to have you here. I've really been looking forward to this conversation, especially after seeing your TEDx talk that you gave in Raleigh, North Carolina a few weeks ago. Before we dive into what you discussed in your TED talk, I'd really like to understand your background in Groundwork Leadership, which is the organization you're a part of, and why it was started.
Yes. First, thanks for having me. I was telling you offline, having our own podcast for a few years, I'm always on your side of it, so it's fun to be it's fun to be a guest. I hope to do more of this. Actually, it's fun, and I appreciate the importance of having somebody introduce themselves and whatnot. Typically, I don't just like to sit and talk about myself, but for the sake of whoever's listening in your audience, I'll share some context around that as well. And many years ago, I partnered with a philanthropist who literally, I was fortunate enough to get a meeting with this individual, financially worth, upwards of $1 billion, very well established person, does incredible things, been doing philanthropy for a long time. At the time, I was working for a consulting and training company called the Arbinger Institute, and I had studied peace building. I had gotten my master's degree in conflict resolution negotiation, worked on a few really cool projects, and had some fun experience as a young professional, but not really set in stone with like, this is what I want to do forever yet. I was kind of just exploring. And I was fortunate enough to meet these individuals, father and son, really. And I didn't live where I live now. I didn't live in Oregon, where they were from. They flew me up, and I met with them for 30, 45 minutes, and they liked what I cared about, and I liked what they cared about. And so the idea was, well, let's have a conversation. The father asked me if you didn't have to worry about taking care of your family at the time. Our son was, he's 8 now. So he was, I think, 2 months old. So he was just a little guy. And then we had our other daughter was a toddler at the time. But he asked, if you didn't have to worry about your family, they were taken care of, what would you do in our community to make a difference, to create, transformation? That's quite the question. He said, well, don't answer me now. Think about it and get back to me. I really want to hear what you think. I had no idea what it would result in. I liked my job. I wasn't like thinking I was going to get a job. It was all about, can I somehow support what they cared about? Because I sensed that they just cared about community. They wanted to make a difference. I liked that. I wanted to surround myself with people like that, even if I was just sort of helping them on the side with something. So I didn't know what it was going to turn into, but I took their advice, took a couple of days, wrote down a plan, and gave it back to him. And then he said, I like it. Let's go to work. He gave me a year. He said, I'll pay you for a year to come up here and try this out, and we'll see how it goes. And so we moved the family up to Oregon, where we're at now. And on the top of my plan, it said, work with leaders. I thought, if we could bring leaders together, and I shared a little bit of this in the TEDx talk, I think, if we could bring leaders together, then from all sectors, all backgrounds, then we could help them develop the relationships that they would then be empowered to go out and make a difference, transformational change in the community. We can't wave a wand and fix things like that, but we can, if through the influence of this philanthropist, their resources and their relationships with the community, we could bring people together. And I found that to be true. And that was a lot of my doctoral dissertation and research, was the power of philanthropy to actually be the ones that can bring people together. Because, it's not common that you get people from across all sectors to come together and collaborate together and actually be successful at it. It's happened, in different occasions throughout the country, but it's kind of sporadic, and there's not a lot of really clear research on how to do it and do it well. And so I noticed that over the years, that philanthropists, especially when they don't have a really strong political agenda, which some of them do, but if they can let go of that, they have a really unique power to bring people in a community together because of their influence. Everybody respects the person that gives away millions. Like, and they will listen when you call. They will respond to an email. They will show up when they ask because they respect the giving heart that they have. People respect that and they'll show up. And so that alone got people in the same room that would never have business being together. And what started out as I call kind of guerrilla style, just attempting different things and trying things out, turned into, we really have something here. Let's create a formal leadership institute there where these people come together. They learn curriculum together. They develop intentional relationships. They're vulnerable with each other. And let's preload these deep relationships so that when the community actually needs them, they don't have to spend their time arguing about what they typically argue about, which I sat in dozens and dozens of these convenings without the intentionality behind it. And most people just spend the whole time arguing over what the problem it actually is. And they don't have a common language to share. And then little to nothing happens. And I grew tired of that. And I shared some of this in the TEDx talk of how to break through that. And that was its own discovery in and of itself. But that was why I say it started from philanthropy, because it was all free for community. Nobody was paying for my services. Nobody was paying for our team that we ended up building. It was all philanthropic. And that is another powerful component because it creates a sense of moral responsibility in others. Like when we would bring leaders together and bring them through our institute, when we formed groundwork formally, we would invest about 20 grand in each person for a whole year. And it's rare that people get that. And when they get that sort of a gift, they feel a new sense of responsibility to their community. Like, here's this guy that's investing that much in me. I'm going to step it up a little bit. And we would see that. And people would step it up in all sorts of ways and come together. And in essence, it was, Chris, figure out how to create transformational change. Whatever you need, you can have. And over the last 8 years, we're talking millions of dollars we invested in our curriculum, in our ideas, so that we could do this. And now it's like we have this, and I'm trying to be like, how do we get this out to the world? Like we've figured some things out that work, and we didn't have to worry about a bottom line. We weren't trying to make money. It was all for the sake of actually figuring out how to create transformational change at a community level with unlimited resources. So I feel like I've been given this gift of knowledge and info, and I want to share it with people.
I appreciate you taking me through that because I think that's a really, really critical to lay out that foundation before we go into the work that you do. And it sounds like you and I need to speak a little bit more offline because I'm currently with this podcast trying to understand how I can better connect blue collar and white collar workers. I launched this podcast trying to make the workplace a better place for all. And having come from a corporate environment, that's what I know. So that's the network I started with my interviews. But I happened to speak to my hairdresser, and we were talking about her work and how hairdressers often mental health therapists in disguise. And the work that they do from a mental health perspective with their clients is profound. So we actually had a really long dialogue on this, and it had to be broken up into 2 episodes. It was so profound. And her episode just got a crazy number of engagements. The fact that we can have a hairdresser in one episode and then a corporate executive in another, all talking about the same thing, taking care of people at work. There's got to be a way to bring those people together and somehow learn how to speak the same language, because we're all in essence doing the same thing. We're going to work, whether we're going onto the construction site or we're walking into a corporate office. We all have the same goal, is to take care of each other, make sure there aren't any safety incidents, make sure we're developing a sense of belonging in the workplace. Doesn't matter what the environment is or the setting. Yeah. So I'm trying to think about how to bridge that gap. And it sounds like you have a similar mission, that you're trying to bring communities together and bring together people of all sectors and backgrounds to have a collective conversation on the topic of transformative leadership.
Groundwork was created to do that and invested in to do that. I mean, if a community came to me tomorrow and said, Chris, we want to help to transform our community and bring people together, I would know the process to take them through. And it's going to be different. Their community is different than Salem, where I'm at, and every community is different, but the conditions and the process that need to be created are going to be the same. All the things we've discovered certainly relate in the organizational space and in the leadership space. And that's a lot of the groups that we've worked with as well, from doing organizational assessments and training and consulting and coaching and what have you. But I really think that what we are probably best at is bringing community together. And I'm thankful for all the leaders that we've worked with, because they've helped me understand how to do that. And we learned through failure. I mean, the first couple of years attempting it, they weren't all that great, and we had to learn through failure and of what works, what doesn't work. And we're still learning. So by no means do we have the answers, but I've been able to be in settings with leaders like the one I shared at the TEDx event, where I just don't know if other communities are doing that. Like one of our last cohorts we had, we always end with takeaways, and we share, people's insight for an entire year of working together, by the way, right? So it's these people learn to really love each other. People that are opposite sides of the political aisle all of a sudden are like going out to lunch and they phone each other up. They would have never done that before. Now they're friends. And these relationships and bonds that they create are so tight. And we share these takeaways. And here's just some examples we heard from our takeaways. One person saved marriage. One person said, when I first started, and we would start in January, we'd finish in December, right? And this is our November session, like our last session, because the December would be our big banquet, and we'd finish. So in November, he's saying, this time last year, when I was getting ready to start in January, my wife and I had decided we're going to get a divorce. We're getting a divorce, and we thought we're going to make it through the holidays for our kids, but then at the end of January, beginning of February, we were going to announce it, and we were going to go our separate ways. We always start we would start our program with a 3-day retreat in January, and then we'd meet monthly after that. And there'd be some things in between, but that was kind of the process. And after the 3-day retreat, which is really heavy, it's very deep and heavy, he said, after that retreat, everything's changed for me. And every month after that, my whole life's changed, and my marriage is better than it's ever been. And then he said, and not that I don't want to be here with all of you, but it's date night tonight. That's how we finished. So we've stories like that to other stories of a small business leader saying, I never even wanted to live here in the first place, but here I am. I've been trying to find a way to leave. But after this experience, I never want to leave ever, because of all of you. To people sharing other actual, impacts that they've seen in their community, of people coming together, new programs being developed. And it's amazing to sit there and hear all these takeaways, where I have to say at the end, like, guys, I just don't know if other communities have these experiences like this, where some of you are vulnerable enough to share what, this individual just shared, or some of you shared that. Like, I just don't think this is normal. That's really something, to have those moments, and quite rare. I'm sure you could attest to. I just don't know if communities come together like that, and you have community leaders sharing tears and sharing, almost, lack of a better term, kind of sacred ground together. I don't necessarily mean that in like a religious context. It's just sacred ground that they create together. I have to pinch myself sometimes to realize that I was in the room with some of that happening. And I feel like other communities are capable of that, and that we need it now more than ever.
I'm hoping that whoever listens to this may have some ideas and can reach out and connect with you. I'm certainly inspired by the work that you're doing, and would love to find a way to implement that type of work here in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I live. So let's talk a little bit about what you said in your TEDx talk. You talked about the meaning of transformation.
Yeah.
And I loved your quote. So you said that transformation is not caught, it's taught.
Yeah.
So can you elaborate on this a little bit more and talk about your experience infusing learnings from your own cultural heritage to help leaders transform?
Yeah. So I kind of alluded to this a little bit when I said there was a lot of failure in what we were trying. In the first 3 years, a lot of things that didn't result in anything. And I think we were using world-class curriculum. We had good ideas, but nothing was really sticking. And it was because when it came down push to shove, people still were self-concerned. They didn't want to be vulnerable with each other. They were worried about their own image, their own organization, or what have you. And nobody really wanted to kind of take that leap. And the hard thing about transformation is it's like the perfect balance between order and chaos, because you have to take a leap. But I've had to learn that there's a process to it that helps you get to making that leap. And the leap is the chaotic part. Like, well, what happens? What happens if we take that leap? What happens if we go out into the unknown? And so it's kind of this perfect balance where you strike transformation that is between order and chaos. But those first 3 years, there was a lot of teaching transformation. So that's what I mean to say is we tried a lot of teaching. We tried to show a lot like, here, look, this is all we have to do. We have to see each other as people was one of our things. Like, we got to see each other as people. That's the right thing to do. We have to collaborate. We need to be innovative. Let's come together and let's innovate. And teaching all sorts of things around relationship building, seeing people, innovation, collaboration, civic leadership. But it was all attempts at teaching. And we can teach all day long, but people have to internalize it themselves and catch it. I didn't have that language back then, but they had to catch it. And so we learned the hard way by realizing that you can't teach this, it's a personal choice that individuals have to make. And then it becomes a collective sort of movement. So that the first part of that little slogan came from our own failures and trials, failing forward. It wasn't like I don't mean failure in a bad way. It just means we didn't know how to do it. And it was a lot of frustration and little glimpses though of what's possible, right? Because some people were ready to make that leap and they made that leap, And I have a lot of anecdotes and cool stories of that moment that kept us sort of in this optimal discovery zone. To keep pushing and learning, you have to be in this optimal zone of there's so much potential and we're pushing hard enough, not so much that, we're getting overwhelmed, and we're not failing so much that we want to give up, but we had enough that was pulling us towards, we're onto something. Let's keep going. But it wasn't until the moment that I shared at the TEDx event that it clicked for me. Like, that moment was the moment it clicked for me that transformation is caught, not taught. And I didn't really even have the language at that moment to say that phrase, but it started to make sense to me that you can't teach people to do this. They have to just do it. And if you can create the environment for them and the conditions, and that's what we call them now formally, these conditions. And my research has been on 7 of them, 7 conditions. And if we have time today, I'm happy to share those 7 conditions. But we've discovered these 7 conditions that if you put in place, make the possibility for transformation and those leaps more probable. You mentioned the cultural heritage. I had been working tirelessly for 3 years, trying to convene people, bring them together. And I realized the problem of transactional leadership. I just realized that people will say the right things all day, but they don't really mean it. But it wasn't until that day that I shared I'm at that event where I did the same thing. I'm at this community event and this person approaches me that I knew, but I didn't really like them and they didn't know that. But I stand up, smile on my face, shake their hand, say, "It's nice to see you." And I had to sit there in my own guilt for a few minutes to realize I'm just as guilty as everybody else of this. I can't even shake somebody's hand and mean it. And the idea of the handshake just was so much on my mind that we shake hands all day, literally and metaphorically with people. We just go through the motions over and over and over again, and we don't even think about it. And so I thought to myself about how transactional I was in that moment. And that's when this greeting came to mind. That's been a part of, it's been a part of my culture and my life for a very long time. My dad's from the Philippines, and like I mentioned in the talk, they don't shake a lot of hands. They do a lot more hugging, kissing on the cheek, things of that nature. But there's this indigenous gesture called, in the Philippines, one of the dialects, Ilocano, the dialect, it's called ongo. And it's actually it's an old word. So it's withstood colonization. But still today, so Westernly influenced, a lot of people in the culture, like born and raised, don't even know what that term is. And so I've had lots of Filipino natives, my father and other family members included, being like, I didn't know about that term. That's so awesome. It's amazing, you know? But that's how they would greet each other through this ongo, the breath of life. They would press their nose and their forehead to another, close their eyes, and then take a deep and intentional breath with them. And that was a greeting. That was a formal greeting, the breath of life. And in New Zealand, the Maoris and my Maori friends were actually the first ones to introduce me to this gesture. It's called the hongi, Hongi. Ongo is Onggno. And in Hawaii, it's called honi, which is Honi. In Samoa, it's feasogi, Feasogi, I think. But it all means the same thing. So they call it by different names. It's all connected in the Austronesian, Asia Pacific cultures. So I loved that gesture when I first learned it. And I remember every single person that I've done that with. I do not remember all my handshakes. You'll never forget when you share the breath of life with somebody. And so I thought about that in that moment. And like I shared in the talk, I thought, what would have changed for me if I did that? But just thinking about it. And I didn't have the time to elaborate in the talk like I am now, but even in thinking about that gesture, it humanized this individual for me and it changed me. It helped me realize that I'm part of the problem, which is the reason why collaboration and community efforts don't go well, is most people show up thinking other people are the problem. So when you do, like, that realization alone was big. Like, I realized I'm part of the problem, and if I don't change, then nothing will change. And that's very much a transformational trajectory right there, is if I don't change, nothing will change. And so I made that change, and he became a different person to me in that moment, just by thinking about it. And I think that the physical reality of this gesture was what kept me from wanting to actually share this with other people, just because I respect other people's culture. And I grew up with two cultures, and I knew that I couldn't behave certain ways when I was with my mom's side of the family versus when I was with my dad. So I'm not going to bring up a culture that would, like a gesture that would be really uncomfortable for people. They're not going to get it. So that was the reason why I was resistant. But then I thought in that moment, I don't have to actually tell people to do this. It's just the metaphor itself. Maybe that will help people think about something differently and catch transformation, So that's when I made up my mind that I'd do it. And I introduced this to a group of leaders in our first year of this leadership institute that I've told you about, actually. It was incredible. And like I share in the talk, people actually asked if they could do it, and they did it. And it was just, it was one of those moments. Like, we have these moments in life where we're usually burdened down by the temporal aspects of mortality, and it's a bit dull and mundane and it's difficult. But then there's these moments where we kind of transcend those things, and they're incredible moments. And that was one of those moments where time and space didn't matter anymore. Like, it was just people together in a room connecting in a deep and profound way, much like my ancestors probably connected, And I think in our Western culture, we've created boundaries to that. We've created parameters, like, here's what you do, here's what you don't do, here's this, here's that. And we create these rules of engagement, which are helpful, certainly, right? Again, order and chaos. We need this sort of balance. So they're helpful. But in the islands, like in the Philippines, there's this what's called kapwa culture, Kapwa, kapwa culture. And kapwa is basically this sort of space between us and others that always exists. I'm slaughtering how to describe this in English because there's no English way to describe what kapwa means. I'm doing my best. It's like this essence that connects all of us. And Filipinos are very welcoming, if you know any. Like, anybody in the island culture, they're very welcoming, and you feel cared for, and it's a collective society, right? It's not an individualistic. For example, my parent right now, I'm helping run a skilled nursing facility, and these are people that they've been kind of forgotten, and some of them have family. But in the Filipino culture, that would never happen. You take care of your elderly until they die, like, they live with you. In fact, in the Filipino culture, the youngest child is responsible for that, and I'm the youngest of five. So like, my parents we'll take them in always. It's very collective. So it's the kapwa culture. So it's the culture that we are all connected. We're all one. That doesn't exist in the West, and I wanted to respect that. But that moment that we were out at this retreat, it's like we transcended all of that, and those people will never forget it. They're like it's not even friends anymore. It's beyond that. Like we're connected to each other and they to one another. Um, and that's when I realized like something just happened right now. And if there's a way to try to replicate this, I'm going to try to discover that. And I found that just in inviting people to metaphorically do that and creating an environment and a space where they're open to it was a secret ingredient. And we started doing that every year, and it made all the difference. Some of the videos we have on our social media, there's a couple times where sometimes when I give the presentation, I actually invite somebody from the crowd that is willing to do it with me, and we do it with one another. I debated doing that at the TEDx event, but there's a visceral change that happens in you when you even witness it. It's pretty amazing, especially for those not familiar with the culture. For those that are, it might be a common greeting and it still means something to them. But those that are not familiar, it's like, wow, this is not like anything I've ever learned. And it's a bit uncomfortable, which is the point. But like I said at the end of the talk, transformation it was never supposed to be comfortable. It's not a comfortable pursuit. It's an uncomfortable one, but it's one worth taking.
It is indeed such a powerful gesture. And as you were talking on the stage, I was thinking about all the times that I do that gesture, not consciously, with my children.
Mm.
I always want to put my face near theirs and, share the breath of life with them. And I don't even think about it. I just do it all the time. I even wrote it in my notebook. I share the breath of life with my children. And then I thought, wait a minute, how often do I do this with my husband? Like this exercise where we just put our noses together in our foreheads and we just breathe. So I came home from that event and that same day, and I went to my husband and I said, we need to do this every day. And so we've been doing it every day, every day
Oh, that's
since.
awesome. And what's happened? You
I mean,
felt anything different? Or?
yeah, I mean, it enhances the sense of closeness. It
Mm.
really does. And to your point, I mean, I'd love to try this with other people and that's the thing. It's like, how do you establish boundaries? And you don't want to make people uncomfortable. But just seeing how much that has enhanced our connection, such a tiny gesture. Imagine what it would do to an entire community that greets each other that way. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about that kind of cohesiveness. I saw a testimonial on your website from one of your clients who talked about how we are all so much more powerful together. How have you seen this come to life in your group sessions? I mean, obviously you're doing this type of transformational work like what you've known with your Filipino heritage, which is wonderful. But how, other than teaching, which clearly that was, you were saying how that didn't work so well initially. What are you using to really help people come together, regardless of their background or political point of view or whatever it is, to really create an impact on the community where they live? I mean, how are you really enabling that transformation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, teaching obviously is still an important part, but I found that if that's all that we do and we're not trying to help people catch it, then we're missing it. And so then the question was, how do you help people catch it? And that's what led to a lot of our discoveries. So I would say, kind of starting from the 30,000-foot view and moving in, you know, the the big piece that I've discovered, there's really three key things that have led to what we've done, right? And I think if we were to do this in another community, these three things would need to somehow happen. And one is transformational type of leadership. So transformational type of theory in some way, it's got to be part of the conversation. So that's got to be the theory of change, like the belief that transformation is possible in some way, shape, or form. That has to be an espoused approach to coming together. The second is cross-sector collaboration. You got to bring all sectors together, and I'm talking at the community level. And I think the same in an organization. Instead of cross-sector, it would be cross-department collaboration, but we'll say at the community level. And then the third is charitable foundations as a catalyst. So I mentioned that earlier, how important that is. And I think that it's so important because they have the ability to be the most neutral in a community. Everybody else has some sort of agenda, right? Like business, they have a bottom line. They need to make money, right? It has to make business sense to them. Nonprofits, they have boards of directors, they have donors, things they need to be thinking about. Education, same thing, they have a board, and politics are involved in that as well. Same thing with government, there's politics and things of that nature. And any faith community, they have their faith, and they're not going to divert from their faith beliefs. So everybody has their restrictions. So one of those groups trying to convene wouldn't work, because people would be like, well, there's something that they want from this, and so people come in skeptical. But foundations and philanthropists, they have the ability to be the most neutral, where they're the most sort of pure intent can be assumed by others involved. People trusted it more because of that, the generosity that they espouse and enact in their community, and it's respected. Those are the first three sort of big picture things that in some way, shape, or form, those things would have to kind of be at the table for a community transformative effort to come to pass, where they could do more together than they could alone, right? Because all those different sectors try to have an impact alone, right? Nonprofits are trying to change things. Sometimes they collaborate and come together, but again, it's sporadic. But when all of them can come together, like magic starts to happen. So that's like this 30,000 foot view. And then what we've learned zooming in, this is when I get into these conditions, and we only found this through research. So we learned this from observations and these interviews that were all, actual academic, research that I hope to do more of, and hope other people, riff on it as well. But there's 7 of these things that came up as the most common themes in the research. The first one was purpose. So having a purpose, that's critical. 2 was a commitment, not just a commitment to that purpose, but a commitment to the process, a committed sort of heart, wanting to be engaged. So the commitment. 3rd was, we sort of talked about this earlier, common language. If you don't have a common language for people across all sectors to share, all walks of life, blue collar, white collar, you name it, that common language is so, so important for people to actually come together and talk about a problem the same way. The 4th is a big one. This was probably the highest rated condition, we'll say, in the research. It was the most discussed and pointed out theme, which is vulnerability. You have to have vulnerability. And vulnerability in the sense of telling the truth. You have to tell, we talked about this earlier, the self-awareness to tell the truth here. Like, transformation doesn't happen without a mirror. So I have to be telling myself the truth and be willing to change. And then I have to even be vulnerable with other people. There's something powerful in that order. Like, when I'm not seeking attention and I share the truth in front of others, whether it's my own family or colleagues or community, just like that, that story I shared with you, that gentleman, it creates a profound sense of vulnerability in the room where people are open in ways they've never been open before. The 5th is consistency. So if we were to only do the 3-day retreat, for example, it wouldn't work. There has to be consistency over a period of time. And whether that's a long period of time, let's say a year, it's maybe less frequent. If you shorten that time, it needs to be a higher frequency. But consistency is important. That has to be there. And then the second most rated theme after vulnerability was this one, which we've also talked about, which is deep and trusting relationships. So those need to be in place and formed. And then the last one was I call it the safe space to learn and practice. So you have to have a place where you can practice and get things wrong, and it's okay. And the best way to communicate this is, when we're kids, we go to sports practice, instruments, dance, you name it. And the point of that is so that we can make mistakes and learn and grow. But then for some reason, when we reach adults, like, those spaces are gone. It's like, no more practice. You have to get it right all the time, or else you're fired, right? We need those spaces, though, intentional spaces where we can come together and not be perfect. And so what we learned is that when we create this actual space for leaders, all C-suite level leaders, to come together where they can relate to each other. They don't have to worry about being judged for maybe saying the wrong thing. They can just have that safety with each other to fail forward. That was critical as well. So those 7 conditions are what came from the research. And I would say those are the 7 things that have helped people come together, to answer your question. There's been process that we've created for all of those things. So for example, there's a commitment process. We have our own common language that we use, a curriculum that we've developed that we've seen, no matter your background or culture, people resonate with it quickly. It's simple to use. And we use the analogy of, kind of the earth, soil, seeds, and weeds. And that's how we talk about people, and culture as the soil. We talk about seeds as ideas and innovation and opportunities. We talk about weeds as conflict, and the fruit would be sort of the outcomes that we hope. And we have a whole curriculum on that, but it's based on that analogy. And that has been a way for people to connect across all sectors. And I could go on with different specific examples, but that's where we've created our process and our methodology around are those 7 conditions where people can come together and be more powerful with each other than they could be alone. That's the only way community transformation can ever happen.
Absolutely.
So,
And I think just talking to people through this podcast, I'm hearing a lot of common threads in the conversations, and what you're telling me around vulnerability, around trust, creating a psychologically safe environment. These are things I hear literally over and over again in every episode. So clearly there's a need for it. And I think what we're finding as a society now, especially with the loneliness epidemic that we're all experiencing right now in the United States, is how powerful human connection is, and how much we are really connected in a greater way, more than even the naked eye can see. There's an energy that connects us all. I truly believe that. So I think the work that you're doing is a testament to that. So just to wrap up our conversation, you obviously bring leaders together. If there's somebody listening to this episode right now thinking, oh, I really want to be a part of this, like, who do you typically bring into these programs? Like, how would you know if you're even a good fit for this program?
That's a good question. We work with organizations and individuals. So people that are interested in transformation, right? They want to change. And the way that I define transformation is really simple. Fundamental shifts in the way that you think, see, or behave. And so if that's what you feel you need to be doing with your life in any shape or form, is going through transformation and change, whether it's personally or organizationally, I think those are the people that typically are drawn to what we're trying to do. We have online courses, self-driven and kind of cohort models that we're running. We're working with individual organizations, kind of implementing our process. Working with a school district right now, and a county government, and another business right now, working to help them integrate some of our conditions or methodology in their own organization. So there's a lot of ways that people can engage with us, but I would first ask them kind of, what the motive is. If they want to experience transformation and they're willing to look in the mirror, that's the hardest part, but that's the first thing that has to happen.
Yeah. Going back to that purpose, right? Really coming to transformation with intention and a sense of readiness. I think that's a great way to wrap things up. If any of you are interested in connecting with Chris and learning more, his website is groundworkleadership.org. And I understand, obviously, you're on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow him on LinkedIn, but he also has an Instagram and a TikTok account, Transform with Chris. So feel free to follow his feed there. There are a million ways to connect with each other these days. So yeah. Thank you so much for being here. This was super inspiring, and I hope our listeners feel the same.
Thanks for the opportunity and the questions and the space that you created. Appreciate it.
This podcast is designed to help busy business leaders create an inspired and engaged workforce. I am building a community of like-minded leaders and experts who all share the same passion, taking care of people at work. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. If you know someone who I should interview or should be a part of this community, please connect with me on LinkedIn. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.